G, and thank you very much to members of the media for making time to join us during this the media briefing, and also to greet the viewers and the listeners at home. I had indicated at the onset of my tenure that I'm going to make it a habit to share with the nation real-time updates in relation to the performance of the grid and how far we are in addressing the challenges of load shedding. I did make the point that we will try as much as possible to illustrate that we are indeed making progress against the mandate that the President has assigned me. Essentially, there are two primary focus areas. The first one is to reduce the intensity of load shedding. So you know that we have hit a historic high of stage 6 of load shedding. So my interpretation of reducing the intensity of load shedding means that we have to gradually go to lower stages of load shedding, and ultimately resulting in the elimination of load shedding. And then the second aspect of the assignment is to reduce the frequency of load shedding. So is to address the number of load shedding days, bring them down. We know that in 2021 we had about 75 days of load shedding. In 2022 that grew approximately threefold to about 205 days of load shedding. And of course now we are on track for a record number of load shedding days in a calendar year, unless we do something dramatic. And you will see that we are beginning to show the results. And I also want to just pay tribute to the workers at the ESCOM for the tremendous work that they are doing, starting with the board led by Mr. Mpomakwana, an exceptionally talented team of a group of men and women whose sole intention is to make a contribution towards the resolution of what is an existential problem that is confronting us. And also to thank the executive management of ESCOM, led by Mr. Khalib Kasim, for the exceptional work that they are doing in the leadership, of course, at the technical level of the resolution of the load shedding problem. And in particular, I want to single out the team at Generation, led by Mr. Beki Nxumalo, the various general managers at the respective power stations, and also the ordinary workers, the men and women who toil on a daily basis, who are making it possible for us to get closer to the resolution of the load shedding problem in the country. And also I want to say that we are exceptionally grateful to South Africans, both industry and households, who are doing everything possible to reduce demand, unnecessary consumption. And we are beginning to see the efforts, the aggregate efforts of the men and women in the country, industry, and I really want to say we are grateful for that. And we also are beginning to see that there are signs that the efforts that we are making in ensuring that we ramp up the campaign on the demand side management, encouraging households and businesses to be judicious in the manner in which they consume electricity, are beginning to bear fruit. Because if you look at our winter outlook, we had projected that we could be hitting highs of about 34,000 megawatts, and we have not reached anything close to that. And we believe that it has to do with the change of attitude of households and industry, and also is a function of the effectiveness of the campaign that we are running. So I'm going to use this opportunity, as usual, to take you through the numbers. The numbers are very important for us to be able to understand, appreciate also the extent and the degree to which we are making progress in this regard. We have made it now a practice that, because we are having this briefing on a weekly basis, so I'm going to give you a 5-day average, if you like, what has been happening on a 5 days. Of course, I did say, when I said real time, I mean delayed, in terms of that I'm giving it to you, if you like, 5 days later, a historic record of what has happened 5 days later. And of course, this is factual. There are a number of things that we are beginning to see which are positive. The first one is that the capacity available now, you can see that is beginning to plateau at about 29,000 megawatts. So essentially, you have seen that from the 26th of June, we're sitting at 28,664 megawatts of capacity that is available. And we close the week, the 30th of June, at 29,913. So you can see that we are making significant improvements, about 1,300 megawatts of improvement. So you are getting to see that, although initially when I started the briefings, I had said we are making marginal yet significant improvements. But now you are seeing that this is real. And what is encouraging for me is that we are beginning to maintain that. So previously, the oscillations will be too extreme. So we'll be, at one stage, we'll be at 26,000 megawatts, and then suddenly we're at 29,000 megawatts. You can see it's steady, stepwise, and it's an illustration that there's some degree of applications were very deliberate and focused in how we were addressing this situation. And then the improvements on the generation side, essentially what you are seeing as capacity available, then makes it possible to create an additional buffer for us to have increased levels of planned outages. So I was listening to people having a panel conversation, and in one of the conferences, and someone was saying, oh, the improvements we are making is as a result of not reducing, rather, significantly planned outages. Now we can see that we are beginning to build room, and as a result of building that room, we are taking that opportunity for us to be able to ensure that we are able to improve a ramp up on planned outages. And this is important because when we get out of this challenge, I'll be able to say with the highest degree of confidence that load shedding is behind us, because the amount of effort and work we have exerted in ensuring that we stick to philosophy maintenance, planned maintenance, has been so meticulous that they were confident about the reliability of these units as we put them back onto the grid. And then the area that still requires attention is the one of partial load losses. So essentially, these are units that are operating, but they are not at optimal capacity. So the significant amount of capacity that we are losing as a result of a myriad of factors, and of course we can share what those are. And you can see that they were not able to fully exploit these units. And you can see that although that we're beginning to see, if you like, those improvements that I'm talking about, 13,681 by the 30th of June is significantly better than 16,468 when we opened the week. So an improvement of approximately 3,100 megawatts. But we really want to keep on making the improvements. We'll be at it, and we can see now we've breached what I call the psychological mark of 14,000 megawatts. We are below that. And I'm not suggesting that it's not, will not deteriorate, but what we are seeing is that it's a downward trend. And for me, that is important. It's just an appreciation of the trend over a period of time. So just a longitudinal study of what is it that constitute the performance of this unit. And in there, you can excavate a number of facts, including the fact that we are becoming significantly more reliable, if you like, going forward. And of course, I did indicate the issues around the peak forecast. You can see that we came nowhere close to the 34,000 megawatts that we had projected as part of our winter outlook when we generated the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario had two elements. The first one was to say that what we refer to as the unplanned capacity loss factor will be upwards of, will be 18,000 plus. And we can see that on average the past week we have 15,400 as the average, and in fact, by 30th of June, we're at 13,681. So that's the one element, the improvement. And the second one, we had said that in terms of the worst case scenario as part of the winter outlook, remember we generated 3 scenarios. We had projected that the demand will be about 34,000 megawatts. And the most that we had in the past week was on the 28th of June, where we hit about 31,540. So really this is a significant improvement. An area that again will receive additional attention is the one on outage slips. Outage slips means that we are failing to meet our promise to return the units at the time that we had determined. And you can see that it accounts for about 1,503. That's the average. But the point I'm making again is the trend line. You can see that there's a downward trend. And when you aggregate and put these things together, they are responsible for us to be able to have 16 hours of the day, no load shedding, 8 hours of the day, stage 3 load shedding. And this is by no accident. That's the point I'm making, is because of the exceptional efforts of the men and women at Eskom. What this slide attempts to demonstrate, so what we're trying to show you is what is the delta between your demand and your generation. And of course, once the system operator uses a tool that we refer to in common parlance as load shedding to be able to close that gap. The higher the gap is, the higher the stages of load shedding. And you can see now what is happening, that we are beginning to approximate, if you like, generation is now beginning to keep up with demand. And that's why you are able to see during certain days of periods of the day, significant periods of the day, I may add, about 2/3 of the day we are not having load shedding, is because we are beginning to balance that. But what is important is that we need to ensure that generation far exceeds demand, and in that way we'll be able to pull out a number of units through planned maintenance, and we're able to build a buffer so that as the South African economy continues to grow and recover, that we've got sufficient generation capacity to fuel, support, provide the necessary oxygen for us to be able to address the issues around the growth of the country and the degree to which you need a reliable power supply. Again, the planned outages, again, an illustration. So what did we do? The beginning of May, ramped up planned outages because we have foreseen that there's likely going to be increased demand as we enter the intensity of winter, so that these units don't get to fail. And then it went down. But because of the recoveries we are seeing on the generation side, the steady nature of that recovery, then it gives us an opportune time for us to be able to ramp up planned demand in the midst of winter. It's an important point there. In the midst of winter, we're able to ramp up planned maintenance. It's an illustration of a system that is recovering, a system that is getting closer to what it should be, its level of performance. I did make the point that partial load losses is an area that is receiving attention on our part. And like I said, the last time when we met, one of the briefings was to say that we are tapping on the expertise outside Eskom to go and work with the general managers at the various stations. We are able to diagnose and determine the root cause of failures from one unit to the other. So if you like, the performance of this unit is not an aggregate performance. You need to have an appreciation of, if you go to station X, what is the performance of this unit? What are the common failures that are responsible for the failing of that unit and or responsible for the partial load losses? And then we know the biggest culprit on units going out is boiler tube leaks. The issues on partial load losses has to do in part the quality of the coal. It has to do in part in relation to us keeping to the emissions parameters, and that's why we've got the expertise to help us, amongst others, to address those issues, and of course we are listing them. So what I'm saying is that we are very meticulous, we are deliberate. There's a degree of granularity on how we're beginning to understand if you like, the performance of these units and the kinds of skills and interventions that are required to help us to address this situation. Again, like I said, outage slips are coming down. The last slide I did say now, it's about 1,300 megawatts or so. So we moved from a high in May of close to 4,000. And look at where we are. We are just dipping below 1,500. So it's important that you have that appreciation, and that accounts, if you like, for the degree of room that has been created for us to be able to ensure that we have the kind of generation capacity that we are having. Is the issues around also creates a buffer for us to take the units out and get to fix them. Of course, I've spoken about what the focus was, and then you can see that, if you like, the peak focus essentially is focus is lower than the actual. And the point I made earlier on is a function of a number of factors. A very aggressive and effective campaign to make a plea to households to reduce, if you like, demand, the kind of interventions that we have made in relation to programs, and also at the various municipalities, City of Johannesburg, amongst others, and the many that are doing exceptional work, City Power, to work with communities so that we are able to reduce demand without undermining their ability to meet their daily needs. So when we reduce this demand, it doesn't deteriorate the quality of life, but essentially it begins to engender, if you like, good practices on how we use energy, and we use it sparingly. And we are not complacent about energy being available all the time. Now we're beginning to transition. When I say we're beginning to transition, is that there are steady improvements that we're making on the generation side. I'm very confident that we'll keep on making those improvements. And we know that we're making these improvements outside the 4 units at Kusile. So there's a 3 that went out as a result of the issues around the flue gas desulfurization. There's also Unit 5 that has not come back. It should be projected to be fired by October, and then the other 3 units will come November and December. And then it's also outside the availability of the unit in Medupi. Unit 4, we did indicate to you the kind of efforts that we're making to ensure that we bring it early. We've got a spare generator that we procured from the Netherlands. So it's outside that. If you put those together, essentially you're talking about 4,000 megawatts. And just to put it into context, I did say the last time that 1 percentage point increase is about 477 megawatts. So if you are close to about 4,000 megawatts, so you are really talking about 8 percentage point increases. So when those units come back, you will see that they will be above close to 70% of the energy availability factor. And when we assume this office, when the president made this necessary intervention, of course they called him a bluff, and then we are beginning to make these strides. When we came in, we're hovering at 48% of the energy availability factor, and we can see that there's been significant additions. If you get to 70%, then there would have been, if you like, about 22 percentage points improvement in that. So we're seeing those steady improvement. The area that remains vulnerable is the one on the transmission side, vulnerable on the multiple areas. The first one is that it undermines our ability to bring on board new generation capacity from renewables in areas that gives us the best returns. So if you had to do a wind atlas, the best areas for you to have wind is the coastal areas of the Western Cape and the Eastern Cape. And I did share with you the last time, and you can see here that really you don't have a significant grid capacity. It's exhausted in the Northern Cape. It's about to be exhausted in the Western Cape. It's not sufficient in the Eastern Cape to accommodate the amount of energy that we want to introduce. And then the other one is about strengthening. So you want to reduce technical losses, although we are one of the best in the world, so we will keep at that, but also want to ensure that you continue to provide, if you like, quality supply, you undermine the deeps. And really the deeps really has to do with the quality of infrastructure at the reticulation level, especially the distribution side, the ones that sit with the municipalities, and some of them they sit with ESCOM. And when you talk to the OEMs, especially the OEMs in the auto sector, they tell you that a deep can undermine their production capacity. So even you have a 3-second dip in the quality of electricity, some of these robots, they are likely going to lose their memory. The paint shops, you have to discard whatever was in the paint, the body, the part that was in the body, and then you have to restart, and also restarting takes a lot of time. So this is an area that requires attention. And because of the configuration of the transmission network, which is informed by the fuel sources, we are a coal-based economy on the generation side, the concentration of the power plants is in the coal fields of Mpumalanga, and therefore the density of transmission is there in the northern parts of the country. And we know that also consumption, the load, 72% of the load is in the northern part of the country, and that's why you are seeing that concentration. There's a need for us to be able to address the issue of transmission. And I was making the point the other day that we can't kick the can down the road in the similar manner that we have done with generation, when in fact the experts were saying at the time that you need to ramp up your generation capacity outside the performance of the installed capacity, but you need additional generation capacity because you are connecting more people to the grid as a part of the benefit of the victory of the democratic project. But we are seeing the South African economy growing significantly. And therefore, in terms of the projections at the time, that you are going to get to a stage where what you are generating is not sufficient to meet the demand. We kick the can down the road as policymakers, and we are sitting with this problem. We are trying to rectify this problem as we speak now. So we shouldn't do the same mistake on transmission and think that will resolve transmission sometime in the future. Transmission must be resolved today, and it's essentially, it's not on the planning side, essentially it's on the financing side. ESCOM is working on a transmission development plan, very competent individuals there, so there's no issue there. The issue is around the financing. We know that part of the conditions that came with the fiscal support that National Treasury gave to ESCOM is that you can't borrow. So we need to find better ways or more innovative ways of how we are going to resolve this problem. And I'm happy to say, like I said the last time when we met last week, that we've put a report together on how we think we can come with a solution that do three things. One is that you tap into the very rich liquidity that is sitting with the private sector. And then the second one, that what you do is that you do it in such a manner that you don't relinquish ownership of the grid, but the state is still responsible for the grid. And thirdly is that the system operator at ESCOM is solely responsible for the management of the grid. Even if you can have elements or components of the grid that are financed creatively by private sector, having put together conditions that, of course, does not put a burden on the end consumer, does not relinquish ownership, but ultimately ownership and management of the grid resides with ESCOM, and that can be delegated to any other person, because really you're talking about the energy sovereignty, and how you do it, you don't undermine the sovereignty of the country. And that's what our report is doing, and I'll share it with you once it has gone through the necessary approval processes on what we are doing. It's going to be revolutionary, far advanced, and you will see that we are beginning to state the case that don't kick the can down the road. You are going to sit with a transmission problem. I did say that the biggest risk to any possibility, remote possibility of a grid collapse, it's not on your generation side, but it's on your transmission side. Single point of failure, we need to address that. And of course, with renewables coming on board and various parts of the country having built that resilience of the grid, you are likely going to have a distributed generation. And that's one of the ways that you are going to protect yourself from a single point of failure. Here we are trying to show you that there's a significant work that is being done in ensuring that we are able to address the transmission side and extend the possibility of extending the transmission network. So we are going a bit south now because that's where our problems are, and because the opportunities reside there in relation to renewables. And then as I conclude, I did say that the last time, just to give you the assurance that we are accelerating the release of the further bid window, that is bid window number 5. Like I said the last time, that the intention is that that should happen before the end of July. And I spoke about the one-stop shop, so we were able to make sure that we aggregate all those government services that are necessary to unlocking, if you like, the issues of private sector investment on the generation side. Of course, we are going to come with these innovations also on the transmission side. And of course, the point we are making is that obtain the decision on additional ministerial determination and license applications. And the point really we are trying to convey today is that we have made significant progress. We're confident about our ability to take South Africa out of load shedding. The commitment I had made before, working with a team of competent engineers at Eskom, the leadership at Megawatt Park, the leadership of the board under Mr. Makwana. Like I say, I can't overemphasize the contribution of Mr. Numalo and his team there at Eskom. We are making significant strides. I want to say to South Africans, like I promised before, we will get out of this load shedding problem. We will build a buffer and ensure that the South African economy is able to realize its potential. Everyone that cares to observe the lie of the land, you can see that the significant improvements that we are making. We are providing some degree of relief. That's not sufficient because during parts of the peak, we have stage 3 load shedding. I want to give you the confidence that we are going to resolve this. It's an engineering problem. On the leadership issues, the president has appointed the Minister of Electricity to provide stewardship to that resolution. I eat, breathe, and sleep the resolution of the load shedding, and I'm confident that with the team that is helping us, we will be able to resolve load shedding. Thank you very much, DG.